Okay, well, we have three problems here to do. For the first one, we're given that f of x equals 5 over x minus 3, and we're going to have to find f prime of negative 2. Well, first of all, we better find the derivative of this thing. So f prime of x equals the derivative of 5 over x minus, oh, and by the way, that's at negative 3x, minus 3x with respect to x. So we can write that as two terms, and that's going to be the derivative of 5 over x with respect to x minus the derivative of 3x with respect to x. And so that equals, we can bring that 5 outside. So 5, the derivative, and 1 over x is the same as x to the negative 1, isn't it? With respect to x. And we can also bring this 3 out in front, and we get a dx over dx. And that equals 5, and by the power rule, taking the derivative of x to the negative 1 will bring the negative down, and then replace negative 1 with a negative 2, because negative 1 minus 1 is minus 2. And we still have this minus 3 here, but dx is dx over dx is 1. So now we have negative 5 over x squared minus 3. And that is our derivative, our f prime of x. So next thing we have to do with that derivative, I'm going to rewrite it right here. F prime of x equals negative 5 over x squared minus 3. We have to find f prime of negative 2, so f prime of whatever equals negative 5 over parentheses squared minus 3. If I put a negative 2 here, I must put a negative 2 there. And so that equals, and when we square negative 2, we get 4. And there's our minus 3. Now we need a common denominator, so we'll multiply by 1 in the form of 4 over 4. Now we have that common denominator, so that equals negative 5 over 4 minus, and 3 times 4 is 12, 12 over 4. And what we get when we sum those is negative 17 over 4. And that's what our f prime of negative 2 equals. Well, for question 2, we're charged with finding the second derivative of y equals 3 cosine of x. But before we do that, let's come up with a couple of identities. And that is the derivative of cosine of x with respect to x equals minus sine x. And the derivative of sine of x with respect to x equals cosine of x. So now, our first step is to find y prime, and y prime of 3 cosine of x equals the derivative of 3 cosine of x with respect to x. And now we can pull that 3 out in front, and we have 3 times the derivative of cosine of x with respect to x. But we know that that equals 3 times minus sine of x, which equals minus 3 sine of x. And that's y prime. So to find y double prime, we'll take the derivative of this. So y double prime equals the derivative of y prime with respect to x. That is, that equals the derivative of negative 3 sine of x with respect to x, which equals, and we can pull this negative 3 out in front, and we get negative 3 times the derivative of sine of x with respect to x. But we know that the derivative of sine of x is cosine of x. So now we know that y double prime of the given function y equals cosine of x is y equals 3 cosine of x equals is negative 3 cosine of x, and we're done.